Okay, we're live. Hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still on hold for a while longer, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster Season 3, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Hold on, thank you. Normally I'd be in the main studio, but I had a flood in my basement, which is being renovated now. So tonight I'm in Studio B. It's been quite a few weeks, let me tell you. Anyway, as I've continued with my show over the last year, I've expanded my radius of guests and topics, and tonight is no exception. And for me, it's an extra special hour, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Many of us have a fascination with famous crimes and murder in particular. And when you mix that in with the incredible history of New York City, that brings us here tonight, as we'll be getting an inside look into Manhattan's famous murders. So let me introduce to you to my oldest friend, historian, lecturer, and co-founder of New York Historical Tours, Kevin Draper. One of the most dynamic historians working today, Kevin has led historical talks and lectures for top universities and Fortune 500 companies. He is also a respected consultant for major media outlets, including CBS, ABC, Bloomberg, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and more. Welcome, Kevin.
Yes, and welcome, Russell. And thank you to everybody for joining us tonight for our topic on famous Manhattan murder mysteries.
Okay, just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions you have for me in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, Kev. So you and I literally grew up around the corner from each other. I could see the back of your house from my bedroom window. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
So born on Long Island and grew up on Long Island in Merrick. Thankfully, only 45 minutes from Manhattan by train or by car. But yes, I grew up in Merrick, and I've known Russ pretty much my entire life.
That's hard to believe. Where did the years go? So yeah. As I think back on, from those early days, one of my favorite childhood memories was of your dad taking us out on Halloween and telling us stories. So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things, with my dad, which will tie into some of this New York City stuff later. He was definitely very active with me, taking me into the city, which again, I'll tell you about later. And with Russ and I, he used to love when he would get home from work at Halloween to take us out trick-or-treating. So just those kind of memories of trick-or-treating, going sleigh riding, taking us to Coney Island, which was like an adventure. It felt like we were going to the other side of the world. It seemed so far away. But yeah, we have a lot of good memories of things like that with my dad and Russ and doing things as kids.
In particular, I was thinking, I think it was maybe it was Gormley Avenue. I mix up the streets. We were walking down one of those long roads, and the stories he would tell us about being in the Army.
Yeah, no, that was Gormley. You're right. A good memory on the names of the streets, right? You probably haven't been down that road in 40 years. Yeah. Just, we'd be maybe not really complaining, but it'd be, be getting late. We're out trick-or-treating, having fun. And my dad, would talk about how in the military, and they'd be on their marches and stuff. And he would just tell us, take one of those sucking candies and just, that'll keep you hydrated and keep you moving. And plus we have a lot more houses to get candy. So just keep moving.
There we were 10 years old complaining about lugging our haul of candy. You would say, well, you want to hear about something to complain about? Try marching 15 miles in the rain.
Yes, right, exactly.
So even when we were kids, so back then, and your dad, like you, was quite a storyteller. And you were fascinated by history, and you were always driving me crazy, taking pictures at a time when that really wasn't the norm. And you would always say, even back then, you'll thank me when we're older. Did that interest in capturing a moment, studying history, did that come from your dad, or was that just a natural curiosity, or was it a little bit of both?
A little bit of both, but definitely I think the biggest thing for me is I always had a real sense of time, and I had this early passion for history, like in grammar school. So when looking back at history, whether it's hundreds or thousands of years, I always felt and knew that the moment that I was living in, my life, was really actually very short in terms of history, right? And I always felt whatever moment it was, if we were in grammar school, junior high, high school, when I was in college, I always was very aware to stop and look around that I was living and creating my history and with my friends and family and everything else, and that it's going to go by quick. And when you take photos or video, or you take that moment to stop and soak up your environment and enjoy it. I think a lot of that was tied in with history and understanding it and appreciating it. And it's helped me to really appreciate life and really kind of slow it down. It's crazy as fast as it moves. It's helped me to slow it down and really enjoy it.
Yeah. I remember one moment we went to the World Series. It was Yankees Mets. And I think it might have been at Shea Stadium. And you said to me, he goes, Russ, remember when we were kids and we always said, could we ever go to the World Series game? And here we were. And I remember I got annoyed at the time because I wanted to watch the game, but you said, no, take a moment. Think about where we are right now. Two kids, lifelong Yankee fans, sitting watching the Yankees play the Mets in the World Series. What a moment. And I've never forgotten that. So I was annoyed at the moment, but I appreciate it now.
And beating the Mets 4-2.
Yes.
That was good.
So I've heard this story from you many times, but tell us about the days when your dad worked at Carnegie Hall in the construction business and the impact it had on you as a future historian.
Okay, so basically, since I was a kid, I would always come into the city with my family, going to museums, the Met, the Museum of Natural History, Macy's Day Parade, Statue of Liberty, you name it, everything. That's what really started my passion on New York. In the mid 80s, something that was very popular at the time, people getting divorced. My parents actually got divorced. So my dad moved into the city. So I'd spent a lot of time coming in to visit my dad in the city, and he was working for a company that was renovating and restoring Carnegie Hall. And he was basically the head project manager. So
this was when, like mid 80s?
This is back in about 85, 86, 1985, 1986. So he was the head manager with everything. In other words, stuff to deal with New York State, New York City, the landmarks. Isaac Stern, the famous violinist, who was he was the one that was responsible for helping to save Carnegie Hall. So I used to come in all the time with my dad, and I was always on the construction site. And he actually would take me to meetings, but they would have meetings at the 21 Club or the Carnegie Deli or the Russian Tea Room. Then they might go out at night. They might go to Elaine's. If anybody remembers Elaine's. And I was just part of that world. And of course, it really helped to really fuel my desire to learn more about the city and really lit my imagination. While he was in charge of that job, the main hall itself was being renovated and restored, but everything behind the scenes was being ripped out and thrown out. All this stuff is getting thrown out every single day. My dad would notice once in a while a sign that would say, no admittance backstage. And the sign might have been 100 years old. My dad was like, what a shame to throw this out, right? So anything that was being thrown out, you were able to take home with you if you wanted it, if you wanted a chair or something, but little things my dad would take home with him because they were just throwing it out. And he started to realize some of this stuff, he wondered what it was. One thing he found was an old beat up box that had a conductor's baton.
Wait, but hold on, but where did he find the box?
Oh, it was in the garbage. It was already in the dumpster on the street.
Wait, so hold on. So the guys the construction workers are in there. They got sledgehammers, they got crowbars. They're just ripping down the guts of Carnegie Hall and throwing it in the trash.
Right, because the office on construction sites are usually outside on the street. They have these mobile offices. So in other words, he's looking out of his window and he sees stuff getting thrown out right in the dumpsters. So every once in a while, he would see something like this beat up old box. He's like, oh, what is that? And he would open it. He would step out of the office, look at it. And, oh, it's this old baton, orchestra baton, right, that the conductor uses. Took it home. Anyway, make a long story short, he brought some of this stuff back to the office to take it to Isaac Stern. And he said to Isaac Stern, he wanted to know what some of this stuff was. And Isaac Stern literally pretty much fell out of his seat. My dad actually thought he was going to have a heart attack. Some of this stuff was priceless, including that box with the baton. That was Tchaikovsky's from opening night in the 1880s of Carnegie Hall.
Wait, that was Tchaikovsky's actual conductor's wand from the 1880s?
Right, from opening night.
And it was just thrown in the garbage like a piece
throwing it out. Because no one even looked, nobody even seemed like they cared. All this stuff was like in the basement, in the attic, behind the stage, and all these back rooms that no one's ever knew existed before. So Isaac Stern says to my dad, please, whatever you do, if you take it to Christie's or any of these auction houses, let us have the last bid. We want to buy it. My father said no. And he seemed kind of upset because my dad said, I'm not selling it to you. I want to give it to you. It's, I think Carnegie Hall should have this back. Even though it was thrown out, it's not your property anymore. You should have it. This should be here like in a museum.
Wow.
Fast forward a year and a half when all the work is done and they're going to have their opening night gala, which all of high society was there from New York on opening night. You name it, they were there. The governor, the mayor, politicians, all the celebrities. It was one of the biggest nights of the 1980s in New York. My dad had a ticket through his office. He was talking to Isaac Stern. Isaac Stern said, you know what, forget your ticket you got from your office. I have a ticket for you. My dad said, okay, but he goes, my son was going to go. The office was going to get him a ticket. He said, no, I know Kevin. I want Kevin to be there too. This will be a special night. We had 2 tickets, opening night. They had horses and carriages lined up on Central Park South to bring a handful of people to Carnegie Hall to sort of replicate opening night in the 1800s, right? The media is there. There's a red carpet, all this kind of stuff. We go in, we go to our seats. We're not sitting in a regular seat. We're sitting in a box next to the stage. It was Isaac Stern's box.
Wow.
We were sitting with Isaac Stern, and behind us in the box was the mayor of New York City, Ed Koch.
Wow. Whoa.
Then we go backstage before the performance was to begin, and Isaac introduced me and my father to everyone that was performing. So I got to talk to Leonard Bernstein, Liza Minnelli, Frank Sinatra.
Wow.
And on and on and on. I got to meet Brooke Astor, some of the Rockefeller family, the Vanderbilt family, the Astor family. Gregory Peck was there. And then we went to our seats and watched the show. And then after the show, the after party, they had this after party, same thing. So we literally got to talk to on a whole different level people like Frank Sinatra. So this definitely leaves an impact on a teenager and about New York City and New York City history. And that really was one of the things that helped to really also give me that push in this direction.
Wow. So just the fact, just on chance that your dad happened to see a construction worker throw what seemed like a piece of garbage in a dumpster turned out to a life-changing moment.
And it wasn't just that. There were like 20 different objects over the course of a year that was thrown out. My dad just gave everything back. He said it should be in a museum, and it is in Carnegie Hall to this day in the museum there.
Wow. Wow. Every time I hear that story, it blows me away. All right. So now that we've gotten to know you a little bit, let's dive into tonight's topic. All right. So going back to its earliest days, Manhattan has had its share of famous murders. It's been all the rage the last several years because of the play and the movie. But tell us about Alexander Hamilton and maybe some of the things we don't know already about that famous murder. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen because Kevin's got a couple of slides that he wants us all to see. So bear with me just a moment and I'll be with you there. And
okay.
Right, are you seeing these?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Blow this up. Okay. So what do we got?
Okay. So I don't know. I hope everybody at home knows a little bit about Alexander Hamilton. If you don't, I'm going to give you just a quick bio of him. Born in the Caribbean, his parents aren't married. He's considered a bastard child. It's going to make life very tough. He's not going to get a real education living in the Caribbean. His mother's going to give him lots of books. She's going to help with his education. When he's about 10 years old, his father abandons the family. Now she's a single mom. A year later, she dies. He's adopted by a cousin who soon after that commits suicide. This is all by the time he's a teenager. Gets a job in a local shipping office to basically help support himself. And he's self-taught in economics. And basically he makes such, by the way, I'm doing this real quick. It's a much bigger story, but I just want to give you a real quick impression. He makes such an impression on the business owners that he's sent to the colonies to get education. He ends up in New York City, going to a place called King's College, which later they changed the name to Columbia College, and then eventually Columbia University. This is during just before the American Revolution. When the American Revolution breaks out, he joins in a local militia, becomes part of the military. He comes to the attention of George Washington, who makes him basically a chief of staff, personal assistant, chief of staff, Washington was so impressed. He was his right-hand man, Alexander Hamilton, for the entire war. Again, I'm doing this real quick, but I just want to let you know he went from the Caribbean. Now all of a sudden he's George Washington's right-hand man. After the war, he moves back to New York City. He's trying to figure out what to do with his life. He decides to become an attorney. He'll usually takes about 2 years, like it does today, to go to law school, to pass the bar. He does it in 6 months. The years that he's in New York, he'll also do a few other things. He'll found the New York Post, which is the oldest newspaper still in continuation in America. The Bank of New York, he starts that. He uses the stock from the Bank of New York and offers it to be the first stock traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So literally the first stock in the New York Stock Exchange, the Bank of New York. Hamilton helps kick that off. He starts the first abolitionist society in New York State. He's the founder of Jersey City, and on and on and on. He's also the father of the Coast Guard. And when Washington becomes president of the United States here in New York City, he brings him into his first cabinet. Hamilton is Treasury Secretary and lays out the entire foundations for our American economy and business the way we are today.
So Hamilton really was he really was the architect of our modern economy.
Without a doubt. And if you were to say, list just a handful of founding fathers who are the most important, we would not have this country. He is definitely at the very close to the top of that list. Thank goodness it took this hit of this play to sort of bring him back into the spotlight. That's a quick bio of him. Now, when he was a practicing attorney here in New York City, he was considered one of the best attorneys in New York. He was also one of the most honest people in New York in the way he conducted his business. And what he would do is he would only represent you in a case if he truly believed you were innocent and you only had to pay what you could afford. And if you couldn't afford an attorney, he would still represent you because he always felt that an innocent man should never go to jail. So his character was pretty incredible in what he did as an attorney. So in 1800, there's going to be a murder trial in New York. It's the Manhattan Well murder trial. It becomes a media sensation. It's one of the first times they're going to be using terms like that. A media sensation of the day. Of course, it's only newspapers at the day, but still, it was all the talk of the town. It's a very big deal. It's actually the first criminal trial in American history to be fully transcribed for posterity. That's why we know so much about this trial. So this was a very, very big deal, this trial. So let me just explain to you what happened, really. Explain to you what this trial was about. There was a woman named Elma Sands who moved to New York when she was 22 years old. She actually moved into a boarding house with some relatives, basically to start a new life for herself and try to make a go of it in New York. Now, while she was here, living in that boarding house, she became romantically involved with a man named Levi. Now, Levi was also staying in that boarder house. Levi Weeks was his name. He was also staying in that boarder house, but they kept this relationship basically quiet. Now, it turns out that he might have been dating other women in this boarding house, and it turns out that she might have dated some other men beforehand. Relationships didn't work out with other men, but with Levi, she felt like this might have a real future. The only thing was that's not the way he felt. So, in the summer of 1799, December to be exact, of 1799, basically, Levi was more or less breaking up with her. And what she ended up doing, Sands, she was somewhat distraught by it, but at the same time, she deep down felt that there was a possibility that they might work this out and he might even propose to her and marry her. That's what she was telling a lot of her family and friends, that he proposed to her and that they were going to get married. I know this sounds like a bit like a soap opera, but that's why it was such a sensation at the time. So on the night of December 22nd, 1799, remember they're both living in the same boarder house. Levi leaves. He just goes out for the night.
Do we know where in the city where that was?
It would be today where Greenwich Village is.
Okay.
But there was really not much north of that. There was only a couple of estates north of that. So basically, once you went north of where Greenwich Village is today, even where Soho is today, that was considered the country. You were already getting out sort of in the country when you were in where basically where kind of like where Soho and sort of like the East Villages, that was almost considered like the country compared to what the village was.
So by the time you got to what we would know as Times Square, you were like deep far away from.
Oh, you were in the middle of a forest. You were, I mean, literally it was like being up in the Adirondack Mountains. I mean, might as well be the same thing. You were in the middle of nowhere. So he leaves for the night, and then she leaves a couple hours later. He comes back late at night, goes back into the boarding house, but she never returns. And her family, who owns the boarding house, the next few days start to panic, and they realize, where is she? Where did Emma go? So there's this big search that goes on. And not too far away, there was a well. Now, there were wells all over the place in the city. There's no Croton Reservoir system yet. The way everyone in New York got their water, you had to pump it from a well. So there was a well not too far from this boarding house. Somebody had found an article of clothing that looked like it might have belonged to her. They think it was basically like a scarf. Another day or two goes by, and then they actually go to investigate the well itself, and she's at the bottom of the well, and she's dead. So the family has her taken out, of course.
Well, by the time they found her, she'd been dead for several days.
A day or two, yes.
Oh, okay.
About 2 days. They have an examination done, and as far as they're concerned, she was murdered. And that's what the doctor that they hired said. And they push to get Levi arrested, and he's going to be tried for murder. And the family is talking to the press. They're talking to reporters. So it's being reported every day. And it seems that he did it, because the way they're reporting on it, it really seemed like he might have done it. There were rumors that maybe she was even pregnant. So the idea was she was pregnant. He didn't want to be with her. He killed her and threw her down the well. Okay. Well, Levi's brother was a very wealthy we'd call him a real estate developer today. He built homes. People would hire him to build homes. He was the one that built Gracie Mansion. If anybody knows New York, that's where the mayor lives, Gracie Mansion. He actually built Gracie Mansion, this guy's brother, Levi's brother. And he built Hamilton Grange, where Hamilton actually lived, his house. So he's a real estate developer, basically. And he has money. And he believes that his brother is innocent, especially because he spent the night with his brother that night. When he went out for the night, he was with his brother and some other family members. So they immediately hire the best 2 lawyers in New York, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. Anyone that's seen the play or know anything about Hamilton, a couple of years later, Aaron Burr will kill Hamilton in a duel.
Right.
They knew each other from the Revolution, and that's them there. They knew each other from the Revolution, and Burr and Hamilton actually knew each other and practiced law together. And they actually lived on Wall Street, diagonally across the street from each other right after the American Revolution. So it's incredible when you look at the story of those 2 guys.
Well, at that time, before they got into their duel, were they friends, Hamilton and Burr?
Not really, because Hamilton was a very straightforward, honest person. And on his grave, it says a patriot of incorruptible integrity. Burr, you would say the opposite. Right. So their reputations were the opposite. Matter of fact, Burr was vice president under Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was going to get rid of him. He didn't want him as a running mate. And Burr, knowing he's going to need a job while he was vice president, ran for governor of New York. And when people asked Hamilton, what do you think? He's like, I wouldn't vote for him. He's a liar. He's a cheat. He's a sneak. That's why he lost the election. That's why Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel.
Wow. So these 2 guys, so at the time of the first murder, the Levi murder, they worked on it together. At that point, did Hamilton already think that Burr was kind of a snake at that point?
Yes, more or less. But he knew that Burr was a good lawyer, so he didn't mind working with him, because they knew that they wanted to win this case.
So just real quick, whatever happened in that trial, in the first one, the Levi trial, what happened?
Well, that's where I'm going to. That's the whole point of this murder. So it becomes at the time, one might consider the trial of the century. It was the biggest news in what was happening in 1800. It was held at Federal Hall on Wall Street, the same place where George Washington was sworn in as first president. And basically, the prosecution's case, their whole thing was they didn't have real evidence. It was more like circumstance. They had a relationship, they left. There was no concrete evidence against him. Plus, they were trying to make the point that everyone in the media already basically said he was guilty. So they were trying to make the point that he couldn't get a fair trial. But what really did it, what really helped Levi in this case was what one of the star witnesses for the prosecution actually turns out that he might have been dating that girl also, or trying to date her. And he kept saying that Levi was definitely the murderer. Turns out he will be considered innocent, Levi. The jury will say, we believe he's innocent. But he has to leave New York because so many people thought he was guilty. He'll move down south, have a very successful business. The guy that they called in as a witness, the prosecution, he is arrested 2 months later for a rape charge. He goes to jail, gets out because he pleads insanity, rapes somebody else, takes off to England, where he was originally from, is arrested in England and executed for another crime he committed in England.
Oh, wow. Holy.
So now the question is, did Levi really do the murder? Because it was never solved. Or this other guy that Hamilton and everyone sort of maybe was pointing to.
Wow. So this is an unsolved murder even today.
Unsolved murder today.
Wow. Wow.
Now we have that photo of the well, Russ, the last thing for this conversation.
Yep.
You see that? That is down at 129 Spring Street. When they were redoing this building, they found the well in the basement. That's the actual well.
Wow, really?
It was buried under dirt in like a sub-basement of a building in Soho. And when they were renovating the building and there was a restaurant there originally, but then this clothing store, they found the well. That is the actual well where the body was found, and that whole trial came from.
Wow, wow. So hold on. So real quick, so with Hamilton and Burr, so after this trial, they moved along. Burr wanted to rise up in politics. Hamilton basically kind of shot him down. Burr challenges Hamilton to a duel.
And Hamilton accepts the duel because real gentlemen would never actually shoot each other. You go to the duel, you do your paces, you shoot in the air, shake hands, and it's over. When they got to the dueling grounds, they did their paces, they turn, Hamilton shoots in the air, and Burr really shot and killed Hamilton.
Wow. And what happened to Burr?
He was a founding father, and he had enough people on his side that kind of protected him, but his career was ruined. And when you did a duel, the people that were with you, when you turned to shoot, you looked the other way.
Right.
This way, when you're dragged into court, nobody saw anything. So there were no witnesses.
Wow. Whoa.
But Burr's career was ruined.
Huh. Wow.
And for those that haven't seen the play or haven't read the book, that's why Hamilton is so fascinating. His life is incredible.
Holy cow. Whoa. That is some story. So look, so when it comes to murder, there are trials and there are trials. And then there's the trial of the century. So I'm going to share my screen again. Kevin's got another story for us, and you're going to walk us through it. So, all right. Okay. So frame this up for us. Who are we looking at, and kind of where are we in history? What time?
Okay. Now, the man on the right, his name is Stamford White, one of the most famous and important architects of the late 19th century, early 20th century. He was in a firm. The architectural firm was McKim, Mead, and White, one of the most famous, important architectural firms in New York City history. This is the arch in Washington Square Park. They did that. They did the Columbia University campus. They did the original Penn Station, the Harvard Club, and on and on and on. Lots of the Gilded Age mansions in New York. Literally one of the most famous architectural firms in New York. Stamford White was very famous because he wanted to be. So he was very much a man about town. And one of his great creations was a building known as Madison Square Garden. Now, everyone knows Madison Square Garden on 34th Street. There's actually been 4 Madison Square Gardens. This is actually the second one that's on actually Madison Square Park. Now, that garden itself inside is where the arena was, but the roof was a rooftop garden. And it was one of the most famous rooftop gardens in New York. It's one of the most famous places in New York to go see shows, to go have dinner. And again,
is that tower, is that the one that still has where the right now where the clock is that?
No, unfortunately, this building was torn down.
Was.
It's one of those buildings that when people make a list of if you could bring back a building that was knocked down in New York City history, this would have been like in the top 10.
So where, in terms of, if anyone knows New York, so with the park, so where is the garden? Like what actual site is that?
It's right that what you're looking at there. That's Madison Square Park at about 26th Street.
Right.
So Madison Square Park runs from about 23rd to 26th. That's right in the northeast corner of Madison Square Park. That's why they call it Madison Square Garden, because it was built right on the park. So they call it Madison Square Garden.
All right. Okay.
And the rooftop garden was famous. Now, Stamford White was very much a man about town, but he was also a womanizer. So if you want to just go back to that slide, if you can, about with the okay. Now, so Stamford White's on the left. The woman on the right, Evelyn Nesbith, she actually came to New York with her mother looking for a better life. They had come from Philadelphia.
So what year are we?
Now we're about 100 years ahead of the last trial. So now we're in the early 20th century. So we're looking at about 1902, 1903, 1905 is when all this is going to take place. So the earliest 20th century. Now, Evelyn, the one you're looking at, she was now she was working actually at a department store in Philadelphia, and she was noticed for her beauty. So she started doing modeling. When her mother came to New York, they thought they could develop that career. The career became so big in modeling. When people talk about who's like America's first supermodel, that's really her. But she was much more talented than just simply modeling. I mean, modeling is a talent, but she had other talents too. She actually would eventually perform in shows on Broadway, and she would do movies. She would become a movie star. And again, she was known for her beauty. Now, she started this career, by the way, when she was about 16 or 17, all right? Remember, there's no child labor laws. I mean, kids could work from 7 years old, you could work. So a lot of teenage girls were working and were almost considered adults. You were out working a job, you might have your own apartment. The man on the left, Stamford White, met her and her mother, became very friendly with her, and he definitely was attracted to her. Now, this is where this is very controversial, what I'm going to say right now. It's a little more detailed than this, but I just want to give you a quick overview of what happens. The mother basically went out of town, and he basically said he would watch her and hang out with her and take her out to dinner and spend time with her. And the mother felt comfortable with it. They went out one night for dinner. They had drinks, lots of drinks, went back to his apartment, had more drinks. He gave her something more comfortable to wear, so to speak, and she changed into another outfit while she was there. And they had more drinks. That's when she blacked out. She wakes up the next morning. She has no clothes on. Neither does he. They're in bed together. And she realized that I'm going to say this because we're probably all adults, they had sex. But this was the first time she had sex. I'm just telling it like it is. Now, what would we say that is? I'm telling it like it is. Rape, date rape. It's very controversial when you think about this, right? And she would talk about this later in her life. The idea is she blacked out. Now, she would continue to see him and continue to date him for a while longer. So they would continue to go on dates. They would continue to be sleeping together. But eventually he tired of her and he moved on. Stamford White. The man on the right, Stamford White, this guy, Stamford White on the left, Henry Thor on the right, knew Stamford White. They were in a lot of the same circles in New York.
So Henry's the guy sitting down.
Yes, on the right. He was a very, very wealthy New Yorker. He inherited a ton of money from his family. They were in the railroad business, very wealthy. But most wealthy people would have belonged to a lot of private clubs in New York. A lot of private clubs did not accept him because he had a reputation of being very unstable. He always blamed Stamford White. He always felt like Stamford White had it in for him for some reason. A lot of these private clubs is because of him. Turns out that none of that was really true. Thaw, by the way, some clubs that he did belong to, he got thrown out of. In other words, they canceled memberships in some of his clubs because of his erratic behavior. He was definitely mentally unstable. But he just had this thing for Stamford White. And he had a lot of anger towards a lot of people in New York, but definitely Stamford White. Thaw meets Evelyn and becomes infatuated with her. And for months and months, and even a year or so, is trying to marry her. He's constantly proposing to her. She says, no, 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 no. From what we can gather, there might have been some financial reasons, perhaps, but eventually she decided to marry him. And she told him about what happened. So that made him even more angry at Stamford White, mainly because Thaw thought his new wife was a virgin, but she wasn't. Again, I know we're all adults, so I'm just trying to tell it like it is. Now, fast forward almost a year. They're married, Evelyn and Thaw. Stamford White would spend a lot of time at Madison Square Garden entertaining people. Thaw and Evelyn were in New York for a couple of days. They were catching a luxury liner to go over to Europe. So they were going to go spend like a year in Europe. Their last night in town, they go to Madison Square Garden, to the roof garden. While they're on that roof garden, who comes walking in but Stamford White? It's a big table. He's got a bunch of people sitting around. He's entertaining people. Thaw sees this and starts losing his mind.
Oh boy.
He's pacing back and forth. He keeps walking up to Stamford's table, walks away, walks back, walks away, walks up again, pulls out a gun, point blank, shoots him in the head. Murders him right there on the spot.
Wow. And this is in front of a room full of people.
Room full of people. It's the rooftop garden that fits
right.
almost 1,000 people.
Wow.
Most people think it's an act because it's up front by the stage. They think it's part of the show somehow.
Oh, no way.
But literally, again, not to get too graphic, but when you shoot somebody point blank in the head and shoot him twice, it's pretty messy. So what happens is he falls to the ground with all the blood and everything else. People realize right away, this is not an act. But Thaw just stands there and lets himself be arrested. Now this goes to trial, and this becomes the trial of the century. Because it's front page news everywhere in the entire country. People cannot believe it because it's got everything. It's got murder and sex and violence. You got one of the most famous architects in the world. You have one of the richest New Yorkers. It happens in New York on top of Madison Square Garden. It becomes a big, huge media event, and they call it the trial of the century. Thaw would actually plead insanity, and he was just basically sent to a hospital to be sentenced. So in other words, he didn't go to jail, he just went to a hospital. And because of his money, he was getting dinners delivered to him. He had a fancy room. And then eventually he was able to plea to say that, you know what, I'm not crazy anymore. And they did let him out.
Wow.
And now and eventually Evelyn would eventually divorce him. And he would continue his erratic behavior throughout his life, and he would die relatively young, but Evelyn would live all the way into the 1960s.
Really? How old was the murderer? How old was he at the time?
He was in his 40s.
Oh, he was.
And so was Stamford White. So Stamford White was a very young man. So in other words, he had a long career probably ahead of him in architecture.
And she was how old at the time of the murder? So she was still very young.
At that point, she would have probably been about 22 or 23.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. But when she first had the affair with Stamford White, she was about 16 or 17.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Another one. So just a quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for me or Kevin, send them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end of the show. All right. So, Kevin, you're not just a lover of New York City, you're also a Beatlemaniac. You and I were just maybe 9 years old when John Lennon was killed, a senseless murder that shook up the entire world. But it took an incredible sequence of events for that horrific moment to even take place. So for those, I'm sure a lot of people don't realize this, and I only know it because you've told me the story 400 times. Just how close did John Lennon come to walking away safely that day?
So if you want to put up the first slide.
Yep.
So
I got a few more slides. Give me 1 second.
Go ahead.
And here we
Okay.
go.
So to back it up a little bit, I'm not going to talk about the Beatles or any of that stuff. I'm just basically going to talk about Lennon when his time in New York. He really considered himself a New Yorker, by the way. 1975, him and Yoko were trying to have a child. She had many miscarriages. Finally, she gave birth in 1975.
And this is Lennon, 5 years after the Beatles broke up.
5 years after the Beatles break up. His son, Julian, never had a real childhood with his dad. If anybody knows the song Hey Jude, that's about Julian Lennon that Paul McCartney wrote for him. And because John Lennon was a Beatle, he was in his 20s, so life was not normal. So 1975, when Yoko finally had a child, they had so many miscarriages. He really wanted to dedicate his time to raise his son. Just so happens, right when the son was born, his record contract was up. For the first time in Lennon's adult life, he had no record contract. So he didn't have to do anything. And obviously he's a multimillionaire because of all the money he made in the Beatles and his solo career. So he said to himself, this is perfect. I don't need to record. I'm just going to maybe stay home and try to raise my child. So it was pretty incredible. And they didn't plan on doing it for 5 years. That kind of is what sort of happened. Lennon was thinking that maybe when he goes off to kindergarten, then maybe he'll get back into music. Okay. You jump to 1980. Lennon decides to get back into music. A little side note, he's friendly with McCartney. He's friendly with Ringo. He's sort of friendly with George. People would ask him all the time, "Are the Beatles going to get back together?" And he used to always say all the time, if it's the right time and it's about music, I don't see why not. So he was always open to the Beatles getting back together at some point. But he has this solo career. He puts out the solo record. So this is the first time in 5 years that Lennon really comes back out into the public, releases the album. He's doing lots of media events and trying to promote the record.
Which album was this?
This is 1980.
No, which album?
Double Fantasy. So he's coming really back into the public eye. If you want to throw another photo there, Russ, he's got the guitar.
Yeah. Actually, just before you go into this, just real quick, tell the quick story about the night that him and McCartney went to Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yes. This is in 1976. The newest show on television, the biggest show on television was Saturday Night Live. Very big show, it was very the in thing. I mean, no one had ever seen anything like that before. Paul McCartney was in New York visiting John Lennon at the Dakota.
And the Dakota is what, for those who
on
don't
72nd and Central Park West. It's an apartment building that John Lennon lived in. Lennon Bernstein lived there, Boris Karloff, a whole bunch of people. So McCartney came to visit him. They were just basically hanging out.
Were they friends at that point? Had they buried the hatchet?
They were absolutely friends at that point. Everything, all the issues of the past were long gone, and they were friends. They would talk on the phone. And here's McCartney in New York, stopping by the Dakota to hang out with John. While they're sitting there at night, John's explaining to him this show, Saturday Night Live. McCartney kind of knew about it, not really. You know, he spent a lot of his time in England, but so they're watching the show. That particular night, Lorne Michaels, the producer of the show, there was always offers, literally of hundreds of millions of dollars for the Beatles. This is back in the 70s, to get back together, but they never did it for the money. So they would literally, people were offering them, promoters, $100 million to get back together. So Lorne Michaels starts off Saturday Night Live, this episode, 1976, where he says, you know, there's been a lot of offers for the Beatles. We would love to have the Beatles to come here and do the show. We have a small budget, so we can offer maybe $10 per Beatle. You know, he's making it a joke. He goes, you know, if all four Beatles show up, I give each $10. If it's only two Beatles or one Beatle, I'll give you $10, $20. Lennon and McCartney are watching this, and they look at each other, and they say, why don't we do it? And they came very close to getting in a cab, going down to Rockefeller Center, and just walking out to do the show. Problem was, by the time they sort of said to themselves, let's do it, basically the show was over.
Oh no.
So it didn't happen because they were debating it back and forth, but it didn't happen. But it would have that's how close it came for those two getting back together.
All right, so now we're back to 1980.
Now we're back to 1980. Lennon's out and about again. Now it's December 1980. I'm not going to mention this guy's name, but this guy comes from Hawaii with the intention on killing Lennon. I'm not even going to mention the reasons for it because none of it makes sense, right? I don't even want to dignify this guy given his name. So he comes to New York. He's only going to be here for a couple of days, basically Saturday, Sunday, Monday. He's probably going to fly back basically to back to Hawaii on like Tuesday. So he's trying to wait outside the Dakota to wait for Lennon to shoot him. All right. Saturday goes by, nothing. Sunday goes by, nothing. Monday, Lennon is leaving the Dakota with Yoko. You want to put up the next photo. That photo is Lennon in the Dakota. He's wearing a leather jacket and jeans. That's taken by Annie Leibovitz, famous photographer. These photos that end up in Rolling Stone. These are some of the last photos of Lennon taken. This is Lennon just before he's leaving the apartment. When he walks outside to the apartment, if you want to flip, yeah, okay. Now, this is one of the last photos of Lennon. He's looking down, and if you notice, there's a guy standing to his right. That's the guy that's going to murder Lennon a couple hours later. Lennon is looking down because the guy gave him a record to sign. So Lennon is signing one of his last autographs he'll ever sign. And one of the last photos taken is with the guy that it's going to murder him.
And of course, nobody knows this at the time.
Nobody knows this because there's always lots of people standing outside the Dakota. Lennon's always nice. He gives photos. He'll take a picture with people. He gets in a limo, goes off to the studio. It's getting late. It's a Monday night. John and Yoko are going to go out to dinner. They're thinking of going to the Stage Deli or the Carnegie Deli to have dinner after the recording session. Chapman is waiting at the Dakota. But basically, it's late, really late. So from what we know, Chapman was pretty much leaving the Dakota to go back to his hotel, and he was going to fly back to Hawaii, and none of this would have happened. John decides, he calls back to the Dakota. The nanny says that his son is still awake, and John tells Yoko, instead of sitting down to eat, let's just get the food to go. And we'll bring the food back. We can maybe eat at home. So they get in the limo, get the food. They're coming up Central Park West, and Chapman is already leaving.
Wait, he's on his way out.
He's pretty much leaving. He sees the limo and realizes that's got to be John. So he runs back, turns the corner. Now the Dakota is built around a courtyard. So normally you pull through these gates, you go into the courtyard, drop people off, then you kind of have to work your way around and come out. But Lennon has always been a pretty cool, down-to-earth guy, his working class roots. So pretty much he told the limo driver, instead of wasting time driving in, just drop us off right here in the corner and go home, have a good night, right? So they let him off in the corner instead of driving into the Dakota.
Oh,
now John and Yoko are walking in to go through the archway to walk into the building. That gives Chapman the extra couple seconds, shoots him several times in the back, and just drops the gun and stands there. Literally, if Lennon and Yoko would have gone to dinner, never would have happened. If they would have hit one more traffic light, think about that. Coming back, if they just would have hit one more traffic light and sat in a traffic light for an extra minute or two, that would have been enough time that when they got dropped off, they would have made it back to Dakota because Chapman would have been too far gone to run back and make it. That's how close it was.
And even if he hadn't been dropped off in front of the house, the apartment.
Right. The first people on the scene are two police officers who pick up Lennon, put him in the back of the car to drive him to the hospital. One of the police officers will talk about this for years later. We'll talk about this many times. Lennon, recently and over the years before that, there was always this talk of getting as many police officers bulletproof vests as possible. They were starting to make these things a little bit lighter weight, but the city was having all these financial problems. Lennon actually bought a bunch of bulletproof vests for police officers in New York. That police officer that picked up Lennon, put him in the back of the car, like 6 months earlier, had been shot, and his life was saved because of that life vest.
Oh, are you kidding?
So like that really, he would talk about it later. So
So this cop who had previously been shot, but because he had a bulletproof vest that was funded by John Lennon,
Mhm,
he lived, and he happened to be the guy who picked Lennon up after he was shot.
that's right.
Holy moly.
They rushed him to the hospital. They got Lennon in there, but he was the internal bleeding and everything was so bad. He was shot several times that ripped off his clothes. They actually ripped open his chest, tried to massage his heart, but they pretty much said he was dead on arrival. The last thing he said when he was in the car going to the hospital, the police officers turned to him and said, "Are you John Lennon?" He said, "Yes." That was the last thing he ever said. And then he died that night, and that was it. And John Lennon was murdered in New York City.
Wow. Wow. God, just the closest of calls, right?
Yes.
God, I mean, almost everything had to work out just right for everything to go so wrong.
That's right. But
Holy.
that's the thing about history. The slightest little thing could make things go in a good direction, or the slightest little thing you can have tragedies. The slightest little one more traffic light he would have lived.
Wow. 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 So again, I've heard the story from you many times and it still blows my mind every time. All right. That was great, Kevin. These were amazing stories. But as we do every week on the show, it is now time to spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories. Wherever it lands is what you get. The categories are cold case, stranger in a strange land, fear of flying, trick or treat, dinner at 8, movie lover, and the tale of 2 historians. All right. You ready? I'm going to spin the wheel. You ready?
Yep.
All right, let's see. What do we got? Round and round. And we got the tale of 2 historians. All right, the perfect one for you. Okay, so I got one for you. You've been offered a dream job. 2, in fact. You can be a tenured professor of history at Columbia University, or you can be the History Channel's chief historian, but you can only pick one. What's your dream job?
I'd probably go to Columbia.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. I'd probably go to Columbia and be able to teach, because that's my dad. That's another whole story. But he ended up being a professor the second half of his life. Yeah, I think that's what I would do. And I mean, dream would be one day then to carry on from that, because I have 2 8-year-old daughters. Maybe they'd go there one day and they would have me as one of their professors. But I think I'd probably go to Columbia.
All right, that's great. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes, some questions from the audience. If we have any other questions, let's see, hold on real quick. I had one for you. Let's see, where are we? Give me 1 second. All right, so can you, hang on, sorry, here we go. Did that moment come? I've heard many. Okay, so like me, you've traveled quite a bit around the world. What are some of the places you visited that has influenced you in the way that you are an historian?
Definitely like London for sure. I actually went to school in London for a semester, so that had a lot of that had a big impact on me, because I went back in the early 90s. I had living there, took all these history courses, the history of London, the history of Britain. Plus we traveled around Europe on our time off. So that was, I would definitely say cities like going to London, the names you'd probably know, but Paris, Rome. Then my dad was a professor, and my dad taught in China for 10 years. And I spent time visiting my dad. So traveling around China and learning some of their 5,000 years of history, basically, and seeing these places and traveling with my dad around China. And my wife went with me on a trip also to China. That had a big influence too, going to China.
All right, so one last one. You love New York City probably more than anyone I've ever met. What's your fascination with New York?
What's my fascination with New York City history?
Yeah.
Because if you look at the 400 years of history, like it had such an influence on the city itself. It had a major impact on the country, but also on the world. And you think about all the things that either were invented here or started here or funded from New York. If you think of the birth of radio, the birth of the movie industry was New York. The birth of television was in New York. You look at our financial history, marketing history, culture. I mean, we're considered the cultural capital of the world, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So it's all those things. And I am always fascinated from people from all over the world, how much they really, well, they say they love New York. When they come here, how much they really enjoy New York.
Yep.
And I think it really shows some of the best qualities of, I think, of America we have right here in New York.
All right, that's great. So Kevin, now it's time for you to sell us what you got. You're an historian, you're a lecturer, but you're also a tour guide, and a fantastic one at that. A note for those of you at home, I've gone on at least 30 tours with Kevin all over the city, and I can tell you from experience, they're incredible. So tell folks about the kind of tours you offer and how they can sign up.
Okay. So there's two parts of what I do in my career. So the one half is the tour company, which is New York Historical Tours.com. So you can check out the website, NewYorkHistoricalTours.com. That's our tour company. So we do all 5 boroughs. We do every single neighborhood. We literally cover every period of time from the Lenape Indians through the Dutch, through the British, all the way up to today. We have tour guides that work for the company, and I still do them also. So if anybody reaches out, feel free. If you want to ask for me personally, I'd be more than willing to do that, of course. If you want to do a private tour, we have private tours, group tours. We do school tours.
Are you doing them right now? Even with
Yes, we are. As a company, we were allowed to open back in July of last summer. We wear a mask, everything is safe. People like myself, I've had my shots. And they're, for right now, they're outdoors. Of course, they're walking tours, and they're just private tours, meaning that it's only you. We're not going to put you in with a bunch of strangers. So if you call to book a tour, it'll just be whoever you're with.
Okay.
So there's that half of what I do with the tour company. Again, check out the website, NewYorkHistoricalTours.com. The other half of what I do is consulting work. So newspapers, magazines, people writing books. I've worked on television shows and also movies. I do lectures and speaking engagements, universities or companies too. Sometimes companies will hire me to do research about their company and do presentations for their company. So basically anything in terms of consulting or speaking engagements, and anything dealing with 400 years of history, I do that. And as an historian, I do the work also. So in other words, if you, again, need me to do research on a particular topic dealing with New York for whatever it might be, it could be anything, the history of the police department, anything you could possibly think of, you could reach out for that too.
And you have custom tour, you have your standardized tours, you've got about a dozen of them throughout the city, but you also will build a custom tour for someone special.
We do custom tours and specialty tours. If we have a Hamilton tour, Founding Fathers tour, we have a Jazz Age, Roaring Twenties tour, we have a Gilded Age tour, but then we can customize anything you want. So in other words, literally you could just pick any neighborhood. You say, I want to learn everything about Soho. We could do a Soho tour, or any specialty. Again, whatever the topic could be. We've done specialty tours about the Kennedys in New York. We've done superhero tour. People want to know, so much of superheroes are based in New York. We've put together stuff like that. Murder mysteries. We can actually go places and talk about some of these murders and their mysteries, and actually see these places and go see that well. And so we could do just about anything you could think of, we can customize for you.
All right, that's great. I highly encourage everyone to check out his tours if you get a chance. Like I said, I've been on 30 or 40 of them myself, and they're really fabulous. And from as I'm sure you could tell from what you heard tonight, Kevin really knows how to tell a story. So that's great, Kevin. It's always great to hear from you. So what I'm going to do is, since our topic tonight has been about famous murders based on true crime, I'm going to share with you a little bit what I have, and a little surprise also from Kevin that you might not realize. I'll encourage you to check out my book, Murder in Montague Falls. There are 3 novellas in all. Each one is loosely based on real life murder or an attempted murder. So my story, Red Ink, takes place in the 1980s, where a paperboy witnesses a murder on his route and decides to investigate the crime himself, with deadly consequences. Now, if you want to see just how it's based on some true stories, back when Kevin and I were taking photos, that's actually me and Kevin from about 1983 on our bicycles and the milk crates on the front, about to deliver our actual newspapers. So with that, I'm also going to call attention to 2 other stories in the collection. A Many Splendid Thing by my pal Patrick Thomas, which takes place in the 50s, where a sultry high school teacher seduces one of her students in the hopes that he will murder her husband. And in The Devil's Delinquents, written by fellow Calhoun of '89 alumnus Don Philbrick under the pen name of Sawney Hatton, about 3 devil-worshipping dumbasses in the 1990s who find out what happens when you try to summon the devil. So Murder in Montague Falls is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, so I want to thank Kevin, my oldest friend, for taking his time to share his stories with us tonight. And I want to thank everyone at home who's watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. And as always, I will see you guys next week. Take care now. Thanks.
Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Thanks a lot, folks, and take care.